Hi, this is Steve Addison for the Movements Podcast, the podcast for people who want to multiply disciples and churches everywhere. Today we're just outside of Houston. I'm driving home with Don Waybright. We've just got out of prison where we experienced and saw the glory of God in some tough places. Well, here with Don Waybright, we're driving away. Which prison did we just visit, Don?
Estelle unit.
The Estelle unit.
In Huntsville.
In Texas. And we've still got another visit to do tomorrow. But this is the end of 2 full days being inside. And just thought we'd debrief what we're learning, what struck us, what moved us, and share that with you on the podcast. So, Don, how many years have you been in this prison ministry?
Probably started in 2012, so you're looking about 12 years.
12 years. And what, just coming away from these 2 days, what sort of really stayed with you in terms of what God's doing in the prisons?
Well, when we see how it's expanded and the impact, none of that was planned. It wasn't like a strategy.
Yeah.
It was like just an opportunity to train people in the simple biblical reproducing tools and cast vision for this way of life. And then it was really, you see the role of the apostolic pioneer, God's gifting upon, using these leaders and within the context that they were at, and they were just really seeing just that gifting flourish, that apostolic gifting in particular, as they were dependent on the Spirit.
What's staying with you in terms of some of the experiences we had?
Really, the death row was eye-opening. I hadn't been there in 2 years. I knew there was churches there. There was phenomenal stories taking place. But what we've seen develop there is really culture shift in death row because of this gospel ministry taking place there. In the past 3 years, now there's a culture shift. I mean, they basically said now nobody wanted to work here. None of the guards. It was very intentional. People did not want to work there, and now they all want to work here because of the culture within death row. You can actually socialize now. They're bringing inmates together to socialize, and you're hearing new songs sung every day.
That's what bowled me over when you talk about culture shift. I mean, we walked in, for me, death row the first time. I didn't know what to expect. And there's some guys, they're behind bars, they're in the day room, and that's a new thing because the culture's changed so much. Prisoners are allowed to congregate in small groups rather than just be isolated. And these are brothers in the Lord, full of God's love and Holy Spirit. And they're singing to us.
Yeah.
How great is our God, and just free and open worship. And, one was, I think one was a Vietnamese background. There was probably some African American brothers, some white Americans, but it didn't really matter what their background was. Here they are. They were so excited to sing to us and to talk to us about what God was doing.
Yeah, we heard stories about how their personalities had transformed. Like particularly that Vietnamese guy, they said he never talked. We couldn't shut him up.
You couldn't shut him up. Yeah.
It's like, and what was coming out of his mouth was so edifying and so beautiful. And I also had had this impression when I'm listening to these guys and the songs and their stories, their testimonies, and how they were edifying us. I felt they were more free than me.
Yeah.
And they're in death row.
And another key moment for me, I just assume, because I know, the state is sort of reluctant to execute. That's what I'd assume. So, and there are appeals and all of that. So probably I figured, every few years someone gets executed. No. I think it was the last 3 years, 24 from that unit, that death row, have been executed. And this is what bowled me over. Of the 24, 20 were new disciples.
Right, yeah.
So
half of death row. And when we're saying new disciples, we're saying not this label of Christian.
It's not just a death row conversion. They're disciples.
Yeah, they're disciples of Jesus, followers of Jesus, surrendered, yielded to His Spirit.
And every year, about 7 of them are going to die. Yeah. Other brothers there that it may be decades before they get news. No, they don't really know. They get 90 days notice. But they don't call it death row. They call it life row. And they just want to honor God and serve Him with whatever time they've got left. And
then your no place left leader that's been the catalyst for that, what he has to deal with in his leadership development is not people, moral failures and things like that. It's people being executed.
Yeah.
His leaders are being executed.
Yeah. And the other thing that struck me was I don't think the execution team was ever happy about their work or joyful about it, but it's become far more difficult for them because they see the way in which these brothers go to their death.
Yeah.
They're sung out of the unit, with amazing, the brothers are singing Amazing Grace as they're taken out. And I think one brother recently, they laid him on the gurney because he's going to get a lethal injection and strapped him down. And he just said, can I sing? Before you take me out, can I sing? I'm not delaying. I just want to worship God. And just amazing stuff. And then I don't know if it was him, but we saw a picture of one of the brothers who had been executed, and there he was laid out for his funeral in the coffin, and you could see him in the coffin, and then a photo in the coffin that he would be buried with of his baptism.
Yeah.
And you just realize this is life and death. This is eternity right here. And of all places, the glory of God is shining on death row.
Yeah, that was stunning. I mean, it's just stunning. Shows the power of the gospel.
Yeah.
And empowering the priesthood and letting it come alive on the inside. And then the other at the Ellis unit.
Yeah.
I had been going there pre-COVID. There was no field minister there that had the vision, but the Kyle Walters, who is an inmate at Ellis, he was one of the multiplying leaders, probably like an L4 type of leader at the Co-Field movement, but he wasn't a field minister, and he was trying to kick this thing off, trying to make it happen at Ellis unit, and he just had all types of barriers, man. Christians just wouldn't allow him to do it. I mean, the field ministers wouldn't buy into it, and that were there.
The people who are in existing ministries, even if they were Christian ministries, they resisted this new thing.
Yeah, they resisted it. And then when Brandon gets there, Brandon Othman, who was Daniel's partner at both Co-Field and at Pallage, and he's a field minister. When he gets there, things start changing, and he's been there for a year, and you're already seeing all these Duckage, and they have like multiple streams of where Four Fields is going forth. From the day rooms, it's injected into the grad program, this Pathway to Hope program, the faith-based dorms, and now it's starting in the chapel as well. So they got multiple streams of where it's flowing into the system there at Ellis to bring forth No Place Left.
Because the prison system has all sorts of courses that help prisoners, get out of the whole gang scene, or just learn some life skills, or improve themselves and prepare for parole. And because the Four Fields and has got some recognition now, they're able to provide some of this training integrated with discipleship and gospel. And so it starts out, here's a leadership thing or a self-mastery course or whatever, but you open the manual or the notes that they hand out, and there's the 3 circles up the front, and we're going to talk about the gospel. Now, obviously, you can't force the gospel on prisoners, but they're signing up and they're learning some life skills. They're learning, how can I take a step closer to parole? And at the same time, they're learning what it means to follow Christ and to make disciples of others. So, it's an example of where if you can get that partnership with authorities, with prison officials, but it might as well be anywhere where there's authorities, there are times that God will use that partnership with authority to advance His purposes.
Yeah.
And so some of these courses, there'll be 100 men in them. Some of them are smaller, but they become a fishing pool then for movement catalysts. So for those listening, and if you're using the Four Fields or some of the tools we mentioned, you look at what's happening in the prison and say, well, we're doing that in Nepal, or we're doing that in San Francisco or Melbourne or whatever it might be. They've put their own stamp on the materials, but all the principles and the simple practices are pretty much the same. It's just the life of God flowing through His Word and the Spirit as people pursue the core ministry, the core missionary task. It's just a joy.
Yeah, I was really impressed what the Spirit was doing in these leaders. You take Troop, who's at the death row. You take David Budwig, who is a principal No Place Left leader at the Cofield movement and at Pallage unit, and now in the Estelle unit. And then you take Brandon, for instance, at the Ellis unit. They have this wig-take mentality that, they've got the tools, they've got the principles, they're abiding in the Spirit, they've got the Word of God, so they understand their context, and they figure out how to break through. So every one of those units was a little bit different. Just the way they applied, the tools and such, and the trainings and all. So it was unique, but each of them had it was all focused on that pioneer leader that was bringing forth the vision, equipping and releasing authority, and then figuring it out, doing the problem solving within their context to figure out how we can get this to multiply.
Another one of my big highlights was what prison were we in last night? It's all merging.
That was Ellis.
And there's 150 brothers who've been rescued out of darkness. I mean, some of them you'd cross the other side of the road if you saw them, especially if it was late at night. And they. Before I tell you what happened that night, I just so many guys you meet, and 16 years would be a short period of time that they've been in prison. You meet guys that have been in 36 years, and I think one guy still had another 4 to go before he's even eligible for parole. And you never ask, well, how did you get a 40-year sentence, you know? Or how did you get a 25-year sentence? Or why can you never be released? You don't ask that. Someone might tell you why, but you don't ask. But you realize every single one of these men in this particular unit, they're in for very serious offences, and many of them had also offended again inside the prison before they came to Christ. And you realize, you know, there was a moment last night where there's 150 brothers worshipping the Lord. You've got very wisely, all the sort of worship leaders and choir masters were black, because why would you let a white guy lead if you've got a black choir going there? And there's guys with trombones, there's guys with guitars, and we're just raising the roof in worship. And I just leaned over to you, Don, and I said, Don, I think we're in heaven. And I haven't been in worship like that, and I don't know, long time. And you realize here we are worshiping the Lord. These guys are free. Some of them will never get outside a prison. Some have not seen family, or family have cut them off for years, and yet they're free men. And I realize, who has made this possible? It's only Jesus Christ, a crucified criminal. Mm-hmm. Jesus was crucified under Roman law as a criminal and died a criminal's death. And only through his death and resurrection are these men free. Can these men be forgiven? They've done things that if we knew about it, you'd think there's nothing that could forgive them except the death of Christ. And you know, it was really life-changing to be in that worship in the context of just being in you know, earlier that day being with the brothers in death row.
Yeah, you shared that word and that teaching from Acts with them last night, and I think it really resonated in their hearts.
So I'm just sort of wondering, we told some of the stories. What are some of the principles? You just mentioned one about, well, I guess we mentioned two. One is, you said their adaptability, sensitivity to the context and the spirit. I was sharing, yeah, but they've got some of the very same tools and the same strategy of 4 fields. You know, so there's a real backbone to this thing in disciplined pursuit of 4 fields, and at the same time an openness and presence of God through His Holy Spirit. I'm thinking some of the other lessons that came for me was, one is the resources are in the harvest. The harvest, I mean, the workers have converted criminals. You know, those trained volunteer chaplains, I think they call them field pastors.
Field ministers.
That's it, field ministers. They're given some freedom and authority within the prison to pursue gospel, disciple making, and movement. But they're prisoners, and so this whole idea that the resources are there. There's support from outside and coaching from outside, but this is a prisoner-led movement. Yeah. This is coming from within.
Yeah, I think that's fundamental. The outsider-insider paradigm. An outside catalyst is casting vision and equipping, but the insider is owning the vision, and they take it and they lead it, they drive it. It's theirs. It becomes theirs, and it's not the outsider's vision. It becomes the insider's, and that's key. I even warned becomes your vision, and they're not imposing upon you expectations from the outside. It's really resonating and coming to alive on the inside, and you own it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the key things, because there's chapels in every prison in America. There's all types of prison ministry going on. The majority of it is outsiders, volunteers coming in, preaching, teaching, and maybe training as well, but never releasing the authority and giving the vision to the insiders, where they own this vision and they're figuring out within their context how to make it happen.
It was interesting to see how access to the chapel, with its meeting space and recognition within the prison, rather than just informal gatherings, in the day rooms and the like, that chapel access was actually at times a blessing and at times a restraint. And the guys were saying in one of the prisons that, well, we got the access to the chapel, which means now we can have a lot of people coming through. We're training them, we're teaching them how to follow Christ and do church. And so we got a lot of what they call in level 1 and level 2 leaders, a lot of gospel shares, a lot of churches planted, but they weren't reproducing multipliers because the ministry was was happening in the chapel. And as soon as they moved that level 1 leadership, level 2 leadership out to the field, so instead of using the chapel to do evangelism, they still do that a bit, but as the priority for evangelism and church planting, they sent the workers out into the day rooms. We want you to evangelize and disciple and plant a church in each of the day rooms. Then come back here and we'll use this space for training you. And so they were able to see more level 3 multiplying leaders come up. So even if something, they were praying for that access, and sometimes it's denied, but the way in which they have to reflect on that and know, okay, we can use this as a blessing, but we've got to shape how we use it, because we're not seeing those level 3 leaders emerge.
Yeah, I think across the board, and if you look at the case studies of where they had really no place left, Cofield at that largest prison in the state, and what you've seen it spread to other units, it's a both and. It's both the central training in the chapel and this organic push of the training out into every living area of the prison. The challenge in prisons is security and mobility. So the typical prisoner is, prison structures are created to limit movement of prisoners. And so it's very challenging for them. I mean, it's almost impossible for them to have any type of mobility. Those field ministers have freedom of access. They can move about the whole prison, so that's only a few of them. But so that's why it was essential to have both training at a central point and then pushing it out into the living areas. And they're tracking it such that they see where the gaps are. What living areas don't have a church? What living areas don't have churches yet, or don't have any gospel activity going on? And those field ministers can work with the chaplain and the warden in order to move some of their, we call hot coals, these guys that are on fire with the gospel, know how to make disciples, move them from one cell or one part of the prison into that area where the gaps are. And that's how they were able to get to no place left.
And in some of the prisons or the units, they were able to say, look, we've got 21 day rooms where decentralized the prisoners can gather, and we think we've got something like 20 churches meeting in so we might have one or two of those day rooms that are not yet got a church meeting in them, so they can chart no place left. Is let's look at the number of day rooms. Has every prisoner got access to a gathered group of believers in their day room? And that's achievable. It's not easy, but it's being done.
And then what we're seeing as this has matured, this movement has matured in these Texas prisons, is that guys are getting paroled that have been multiplying churches and multiplying disciples inside the prison. They're beginning to get paroled. And so we're trying to figure out, and we're emerging stages of that, trying to figure out how to engage them in a free world, help them transition and continue to live that lifestyle and be fruitful, multiplying disciples and churches. And so we've now got the beginning stages of these residential programs, training programs in a free world in Houston and in Dallas area. So that's just beginning.
Something else I wanted to... one reflection I had on, the fruit that they're seeing there, I think there's a couple of elements. One is, people are crammed in together. You can't get away from people in a prison. It's now different prisons will have tasks to do, and they might be working out in the gym or whatever it might be, but you're spending a lot of time with people, and that really raises the opportunity for gospel share, but also time for discipleship. And these churches aren't meeting once a week on a Sunday. They might be meeting 3 or 4 times and then going to the chapel for a worship time and a music time. And so the people have time to, and they're at a critical point in their lives where all of a sudden they're hungry for something more than the life they've created for themselves. They've got time, and just how conducive it is for the spread of the gospel. The other thing is, it wouldn't be conducive if it was just, pray a prayer and you'll get to go to heaven when you go into death row. These guys are called to discipleship, and there's a reinforcing level of commitment and accountability, but it's overlaid by a deep love for one another.
Yeah, it's good.
That is so visible. Everybody's hugging everybody. Everybody's encouraging everybody. There's a men who would have been previously in rival gangs and obligated to fight or kill each other if they were in a room alone. So that's partly why I said to you, Don, that night when it was the worship, it was the knowledge of Christ's forgiveness for these men. It was their love for one another that was so contagious. I half jokingly said, I wish I could come back here and be part of your church, but I realized I'd probably have to do something very wrong in order to be placed in the prison. But the whole package was so encouraging. And then probably the other element that really added vitality to these disciples is, because they've got their time, because they're aware of their broken life and their desire to put it back together and the motivation of the Lord, they're hungry to learn and grow in all areas of life. So, it was not the foreboding, fearful danger-filled experience I was expecting. It was a taste of heaven.
Yeah. It's like the kingdom's coming to these prisons. It is a taste of heaven. That was a good word. They do really function as apostolic bands. I mean, they really, this community formed around reaching the lostness of the prison. They're sold out for that. They're laying down their life for that, and the bar is really high. Their level of accountability is super high, much more than what we see in the free world. And they bond around that. They love one another going through that. And we've talked a lot about high level, about movement inside the prison, but it comes down to what we saw today. Was we had a class of 100 people. They asked the question, how many of you come from a broken home? And every single one of them raised their hand. And every single one of them probably came from abusive homes. And they are oppressed by guilt and broken identity and shame and just been beat down ever since their childhood. And the gospel absolutely sets them free. We see it at the individual level. They have a new identity. They recognize they're the beloved. They're part of a new humanity, this new life of Christ with one another. And man, it's beautiful to see just those testimonies, every one of those individual testimonies, how they're contagious with the love of Jesus.
Now for a glimpse of the glory of God on death row.
Father, let your kingdom come. Father, let your will be done on earth as in heaven. Right here in my heart.
Is this happening?
Father, let your kingdom come. Father, let your will be done on earth as in heaven. Right here in my heart. Give us this day. Forgive us as we forgive the ones who sin against us. Forgive them and lead us not into temptation. The power, the glory are yours. It's yours, it's yours, all yours, forever and ever. The kingdom is yours. Father, let your kingdom come. Father, let your will be done on earth as in heaven. Right here in my heart. On earth as in heaven. Right here in my heart.
1 in 100 people in the United States are in prison right now. That's over 1.2 million people at any one time, and it's rising. Let's pray that God would raise up workers for the prisons and out of the prisons, so there'd be no place left in the prisons around the United States and even beyond that to other parts of the world.